Hi, my name is Roger Christie. I'm the Managing Director of Propel, a consultancy that helps leaders and organisations build purposeful digital brands. And I'm also the co-founder and facilitator of the Government Digital Leaders Network. I'm joined today by three fellow members of that network, Amanda, Mark and Tim, to talk about digital participation and particularly digital participation among public sector leaders. And importantly, what's holding them back. So let me introduce our guest quickly. Amanda Dennett is the Head of Digital Experience at the Australian War Memorial and has previously worked as a media advisor, led a government video production team and implemented social media customer service at the Department of Human Services a few years ago. Amanda has spent the past 4 years researching Australian government use of social media and best practice in social media teams, including some fascinating research she did not too long ago. She's also joined by Mark Bailey, who is the current Senior Manager of Digital Channels at Ambulance Victoria. And Mark's actually been at the forefront of digital revolution, having implemented business television programs for multinational companies like NAB and Westpac. But more recently, he's led a team of digital and social media specialists at Victoria Police before changing the lights and sirens and moving over to Ambulance Victoria, where his first task has been to put together a newly formed digital communications team. And last but certainly not least, Tim Price is a digital director at the ACT government and has been working on digital channels for over 25 years within government, emergency services, universities and the entertainment space, which is a very broad mix. So thank you for joining us, Tim, and thanks to all of you for sharing your views on what is an increasingly important topic, particularly for leaders and those advising them across the public service. So welcome.
Thanks, Roger.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks for having us.
So what we're here to talk about today, the context for our discussion, if you will. So not that long ago, we, as in Propel, we recently launched a report in partnership with Brandwatch, a social analytics tool, that analysed the efforts and effectiveness of the Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews online during COVID. And we honed in on Premier Andrews as he faced arguably the greatest amount of scrutiny from all sorts of audiences during what was 175 odd days of lockdown in Victoria, as I'm sure Tim and Mark in particular know all too well, because we were interested to see whether his digital brand, the posts and the engagement that he was conducting online, did that actually help or damage his reputation? And we did this because having now worked with over 30-odd agencies and leaders from across the federal, state and local levels of government, we've become acutely aware of the almost default attitude towards social media among leaders, and that is participation equals risk. Now, I don't want to focus on the report itself today, and nor do I really want to hone in too much more on Premier Andrews and the work that he did himself, as I think the findings and the recommendations apply, one, across the realms of government, and two, honestly, even more broadly into the corporate sector. Leaders of any organisation today can take what they will from those findings and recommendations. But I am keen to use those findings to frame our discussion in the hope that the evidence that we've provided in that report, combined with the collective advice and experiences of the group we have with us today, will encourage more leaders and their advisors to take up the opportunity online, particularly knowing now how much more cut through and engagement leaders get compared with what could be called faceless government entities. So let's start things off on a positive note and drawing from your own experiences, guys, in your view, what are the benefits of leadership participation? And what does the public sector and citizens, to be fair, stand to gain by more leaders becoming more active online? Maybe Amanda, I'll go to you first.
Thanks, Roger. Well, I've got a couple, and it was really nice to spend a bit of time thinking about the benefits and I guess the opportunities that having leadership put themselves out there through social media can provide for the rest of us, because I think that there is a sense that it's a risky move to do, or that you're opening yourself up to extra criticism, which may in fact be the case for many. But it is a really exciting opportunity. So my top three are, firstly, for both government and citizens and public sector leaders, I think it's the ability to identify issues and, jump in and fix those early where possible. And there are numerous examples of agencies and individuals being able to see the swell of an issue occurring before they would have been notified through traditional channels, and then they're able to take swift action and either fix it for an individual or make a fix to a part of a system that was actually going to cause a much larger problem, had they not done something about it. And so I think that that's something that's really powerful, and as your report sort of goes to that, you can wait until something hits mainstream media, but, then you're behind the eight ball. So that ability to identify and fix things earlier, I think, is really powerful. My second one is just generally a permission to participate. I think for both public sector workers of all levels, as well as for members of the public, having leaders to identify with and engage with through social media channels provides them with extra permission to participate. So, there's no point going on there and having public discourse if those with power or in power, can't kind of hear those and hear our perspectives and then take those and bring about some change. So I think that that's something that's really exciting. And then my third one is really that it puts our values on display, which I think is something that's becoming increasingly important and powerful today with, Me Too and Black Lives Matter, movements. Is we're expecting more from our leaders in both public and private sector. We want to know what they value, and we want to work for people whose values match our own. And so I think it's quite powerful for individuals as well as leaders to be able to state, this is what's important to me, this is what I value, both as a leader and as a private citizen, and to begin to draw people to them that value similar things. So I think that some really exciting opportunities. They're my top three.
Yeah, Amanda,
Excellent.
just on that last point, that's one of the things I wrote down is you can, when leaders have that voice, and it can also give a voice to others, and they can be speaking on topics that resonate with them. And then when you go into that digital space, you connect with others, you talk about issues that matter to people, then that can enact change, which I think is really powerful. And I think the power of it often outweighs the actual risk that people are obviously hesitant to jump into that space.
Thank you, Tim. Mark, did you have anything to add to those points?
Well, it sort of dovetails, Roger, into some of the stuff that I'm probably going to talk about. But, often it is, that digital advocacy is really important, to be able to sort of lean on your troops, if you like, as a leader and what have you, to say, well, it's not all about me just leading from the front, but who out there in my organisation is actually going to support me on the journey of change in digital and what have you. And I think that's just as important as well. You can't do it independently.
No, it sort of draws on an example of, I sort of reflect back early on in my career, and it was my job to try to get a good news story in the newspaper for the government agency I was working for. And I wanted to use the CEO as the hook, really, to get the story in the paper. They were participating in sort of a fun run type activity, I think it was, and they really did not want to be part of the piece. They said, it's not about me, it's about the staff, and I want to shine the light on them. And I was pretty new, and I remember getting a call from their office saying the CEO doesn't want to participate, and I thought I might be sacked. But I did end up having to explain that, if we don't include you in the story as the CEO, it probably won't get a run in the paper. And so there is that sense of, that translates to social media today, that if our leaders don't put themselves out there and be willing to kind of have the light shone on them, for the purpose of them then being able to highlight others, then, we might not get a view of that at all. And it kind of made me think of that there's some parallels there from old school and new school media.
It's absolutely key. It's like you're taking the words out of my mouth, Amanda. The fact is that often leaders don't lead, and that's the biggest issue that I see, not only in government, but also in private enterprise as well. So when someone gets to a CEO position or a managing director's position or whatever it might be, it always becomes really cozy for them, and they have minions around them that are pulling them different ways and what have you. But a true leader will stand up for what he or she believes in and say, no, I think this is the path we're going to go down. Let's try this first. If it fails, so be it. Change tack and what have you. But, that's always the way. Let leaders lead. We don't have enough of them in Australia.
So this is an interesting point, guys, because it links with something that we found coming through the report, which is around the power of the individual themselves. And I think drawing from what both of you were saying just now, Amanda and Mark, what we got a sense of was the human face was a real opportunity. You're talking about it in the context of leading people and leading by example, making it okay, enabling and empowering others. That's sort of setting the direction and the example. But also from a visibility perspective and from a driving positivity and positive engagement perspective with external audiences. So talking, whether that's citizens, whether it's media, as you were saying, Amanda, what have your experiences been working directly with leaders or working as a team supporting leaders? What have your experiences been around the misperceptions that might be holding them back? What's stopping them from leading, to your point, Mark?
Well, I think the simple fact as a leader in the organisation, if you don't tell your story, someone else will. And that narrative can be really bad. We've seen it time and time again, particularly in the last few years. So, there has, to Amanda's point earlier, there's been for most organisations this really cosy relationship with the media. We'll be able to get stories out in, mainstream newspapers, mainstream media, and that I've done my job as a communicator, because we'll let the media tell the beautiful stories about our organisation. The 24/7 news cycle, misconception one, doesn't allow that for anymore. The media outlets will pick up on any angle of the story to tell it how they want to. So if you don't drive the narrative yourself through your owned channels and your social media platforms, then you're really putting yourself at risk. And, that might come with an element of risk in that you will get some negative feedback from the community via those channels and what have you. It's about how you manage those. It's about engaging in the conversation. This is not an executive summary. The pathway for this is more like a 500-page novel. It takes time to build an audience. If you think about some of the things that I've seen in the past, like if a social media post goes out around an iftar dinner or something like that, the negativity. When are we having the Christian dinner? When are we having the pagan dinner? That sort of thing. It's about putting it in perspective that these people and these communities play a big role in our community as well, and that we should celebrate some of the festivities that they have and what have you. So you've got to keep knocking those things on the head. But I also think there's another misconception in that there is that fear of telling the story because of the community backlash. And then there's about following the leader. So leaders often follow. Again, I remember wanting to institute an AI-driven chatbot at a particular organisation. And the first question I got from the leader is, well, who else is doing this? Well, in fact, no one else in the world from this organisational point of view was doing this, but it was the way forward. We tried, we tested, we went with it, and it was extraordinarily successful. It led to pathways in that AI-driven chatbot around recruitment, supporting the recruitment campaign, online reporting, COVID itself linked to the DHS site and what have you. So there are real wins in that. But, leaders will very quickly support it if it works. But if it doesn't, then, again, you have to change tack, as I mentioned earlier. And finally, the other misconception that I see is actually there's a fear of change internally. And by what I mean by that is that, if we change roles and if we change the way we're doing things, that people could lose their jobs. Well, in fact, that's not the case, and it's been proven that digital change means that roles might change and what we have to do is different, but technically people don't lose their jobs. So it's that digital advocacy again, building, training, creating roles with your own workforce that are going to help you communicate better via social media platforms and your own channels.
So what I'm hearing in there, Mark, is almost a common thread around education, knowledge, confidence, comfort, whatever you want to call it, sitting around this space. Tim, do you have a view on that too, around these kind of misconceptions around risk or what is holding public sector leaders and their advisors back in particular? Does it centre around education in your view? Is there something else that you would highlight as a legacy attitude that needs to be left behind?
Yeah, I think it's having worked in government for so long. It's a common theme that seems to run through, and I think it's one of the key points of your report. often leaders will look at risk. Risk is so important to them. So digital is a constantly transforming state. Like you just think of the digital transformation that's happened in the last 20 years. So if you want to sort of make change or be out there, you're constantly battling risk. What's the risk going to be? So it's a constant fight for change within organisations, particularly in government. So all the big changes I've worked on, it's been managing the risk to get things changed, and it's often a long fight within organisations. So and Mark's point is great is that often they'll look to someone else to do it first. They want to see that someone else has done it before you do it. But digital changes so quickly that if you wait for other people to do it, you're just left behind, and then you're constantly 5-10 years behind because you're just following other people. So and that covers everything, I think, in a digital space. And then, of course, leadership and digital and participation in digital from leadership, it comes down to that fundamental risk. I think one of the keys to getting over it is the reward. It's what's on the other side. So if you minimize the risk and manage it, then there's enormous benefits. And Mark's example of the chatbot is a great one because that's going to benefit an organization for years to come. But it's managing that risk in the beginning. So often those are the conversations you'll have with leaderships and executives. It's always around, what is the risk and what's the benefit, and is it worth proceeding? I think. Do you have any thoughts on that, Amanda? I'm sure you've got experiences in that space.
Yeah, it's look, all of what you're saying is very true, and I think anyone who's worked in this space for a while has had experiences with leaders who are keen and those who are hesitant and those who just don't want to know about it at all. And I think what's exciting now is, like I was sort of reflecting as you were talking about how I think we do have a bit of a changing of the guard now, which I think is going to be great to watch in future years where, we don't just have people who've been say public sector leaders for a long time who, are having to convince to have social media accounts. We've actually got, there's like a new raft of people that are moving into senior public service roles that have had social media accounts that they've used and that they'll continue to use. It's, a bit more natural to them. It's part of how they've operated already. And so they'll bring that into their new leadership role. And there might be some challenges for them in how they manage, public versus private personas, and that's a whole separate discussion about how closely those should be aligned. But I think that it's kind of cool to think that we will have a bit of a shift from the traditional, we think you should have a Twitter account for this reason, into, okay, you've got one and this is how you've been running it, and here are our recommendations for how you can use it, in this new role that you're in, which I think is really cool. But some of the risks, I'm not a traditionally kind of risk averse person, even though I've pretty much always worked in government. But I think that reflecting on risks and making a plan to mitigate those is really important, and it makes people feel empowered. Having a plan makes them feel empowered to participate. And I think it's worth acknowledging that it is difficult for people, and particularly leaders at times, to have that balance between, making a comment and putting their values out there and then knowing when not to comment, because just because you've got sort of opinions and a statement on some aspects of work and life doesn't mean you have to have an opinion on everything. And it can be really hard to know when to say something and when not to, particularly when you're in the spotlight. And I think over time, traditionally we do have a base level of advice that is a bit ambiguous about how much we're allowed to participate, and that's for public servants at all levels. But the recent advice is about that. If you are in a position of leadership within the public sector, then people put more weight behind your views than they do the views of perhaps a lower level public servant. And so statements like that within policies do make us pause and think, can I participate? Shall I participate? And, how much do I have to filter myself? And we all need to make those judgments. But I think that ambiguity in those things have really played into people's risk aversion. And those policies are really necessary. But I think that that's part of the context that people arrive at this, hesitancy. And it's worth acknowledging that.
Of course, all of this doesn't just apply to government either. All of what we're talking about applies to the private sector as well, as you would well know, Roger. When I was working private enterprise, it was all about shareholder dollar, return on the dollar and what have you. And if a CEO said something that was out of kilter and what have you, you watch the dollar plummet, So there's all the risk that is attached with that. But I also think that today, the transparency, if you look at the banking industry today, for example, it hasn't really impacted the share price, even though there's been royal permissions into them and what have you, because they've been more transparent and open in their dealings. And I'm actually quite thankful. I've just got a return of a few $1,000s on fees that they owe me. So, I'm happy about that.
It all works out in the end, doesn't it, Mark? So you touched on a couple of key things there, which, like Amanda, just now you're calling out policy as one of those key, not necessarily a blocker or a barrier. It is an essential component, but it's something that can either encourage or deter people from participating. What would you guys see as the key things that need to change for digital participation to become the norm amongst leaders across the public sector? Tim, if I can ask you that question first.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, and obviously Amanda's talking about going into a new phase or a new space, but it's the digital space needs to be valued. I think that's just extremely important. And once people see the value and the benefits of it, then I think that's going to drive more participation. And I think that's something that came out of your report as well. Often there isn't much analysis of the benefits and value, and just deep diving into that actually would probably change a lot of perceptions. I think the report highlights that it might not be as people think when you actually look at the data. So I think that's really important. And just picking up on something Mark spoke previously about, I think something you want to see from leaders is authenticity. And some of the best leaders I've seen, you can tell it's their own voice and it's an authentic voice. And then I think that also builds a bit of trust as well. And when you build trust with an audience, then what you say has that greater importance, and you have that connection with people. So I think the key things as we move forward for leaders, I think they need to see the value in digital, the value of having a voice on social, and seeing what they can get out of it and what can benefit them, but what can benefit the community, what can benefit in the policy space as far as government. And then all those things together, I think, can drive really good change and positive change. So technology is one of those things where it can be used, for good or for evil. But the technology is there at the moment. So I think we're in a really interesting space. And as Amanda said, as the new leaders come into this space who've actually been on social for a long time, it's going to make a real difference. I think the best leaders I've seen, they really are invested in those channels, and they actually love getting on the digital space, and that you can see it when in their communications. So I think hopefully going forward, digital is going to be so highly valued that people will invest more and more time in that space, and so will leaders.
Thanks, Tim. Amanda, Mark, did you have a view on what, from your perspective, what would be the number one thing aside from time, Amanda, and waiting for the change of leadership? I suppose, is there something that you see as driving that transformation around participation?
Yes, and look, I think let's not wait any longer, because I think it's something that's been, this transformation's been happening for some years now, which is exciting. And for some agencies, I think at the local, state and federal government levels, there are some that are already quite far advanced in some aspects of digital transformation in a way that is really benefiting people on the other end. So just the ability to complete online claims and do your ID checks online and all of those things. Renew your car rego with, out having to leave the couch so they're all base level things that I think have changed what community expectations are from government. And so I think that's the big thing, is that like as consumers, customers, members of the public, voters, however we are in a particular moment, I think it's continuing to have those expectations and putting a bit of pressure on those institutions to let them know how we want to communicate, have services delivered, how we want to give feedback and engage, because like any other business, government needs to meet people where they are, needs to provide good service, trust. They're not really selling things, but they're in the business of measuring value and trust, I guess. And so, meeting those community expectations is really, it matters to every government agency at all levels. And so I think that's something, if we continue to have those expectations and give that feedback to government, then that will continue to drive it from outside. That sort of transformation doesn't always have to be driven from within, I think.
Yeah, excellent. And I would say that visibility is absolutely a precursor to trust. So that's an important role for leadership to play. Mark, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's not off message, but I think it's something that needs to be considered, that as we go down this path of digital transformation, we do run the risk of becoming a giant digital dumping ground, if you like, so everything's going out, everything's going out digitally and what have you. So we need to, I know people talk about white noise. I'm not going to talk about white noise specifically, but the way to cut through that is to get your content strategy right. The way to cut through that is to get your content strategy right. You want to communicate it and let your channels then dovetail into that. You want to communicate it and let your channels then dovetail into that. That's really critical, because if you don't do it in those two steps, you're just going to, well, I hate it, but people externally won't be able to make any sort of head or tail around what you're trying to say as well. So content, then channel, and that hopefully will reduce that amazing amount of digital communication that's going out. And then finally, there's no point just pushing it out. To your point, Amanda, you need results, data-driven results. So anything that you do needs to be informed by the data. So you've got to have good tools for that as well.
Excellent, thank you. And I think, picking up what you're saying there, Mark, and what Amanda was saying earlier, horses for courses. Leaders shouldn't feel they have to have a view on every single thing, on every single channel, on every single piece of content. We appreciate that as well. It certainly relieves the strain, and it improves the level of engagement and authenticity online. So, certainly don't feel you need to be on every social media platform under the sun. So we've talked a bit about leaders. We know that one of the key audiences in all this as well, that is hopefully driving and assisting this transformation we're talking about, is their trusted advisors, those sitting in communications or social media or digital roles. In your view, and maybe I'll go to Amanda on this one first. In your view, what are the very practical things they should be doing to help leaders today? What is their job in all this?
So their job's busy, and their job is also, it requires them to have, excellent judgment, a background across varied aspects of communications, I think, and a strong understanding of digital. I think it's just worth kind of giving a shout out to people who do this work. You're busy and awesome, because, I think the people that do these jobs, are kind of paving the way, I think, for a different era of communication between governments and citizens, which is really exciting. So, look, my top things are, in terms of practicality, it draws on what Mark just spoke about, and that's content. So, assistance with content, whether that's just at the ideas level, alerting leaders to things that are bubbling, things that are getting a bit of groundswell, issues that they should be aware of. Leaders are busy and don't have the time to do all of their own kind of monitoring. So providing that content and issues advice is really important. Again, helping leaders to understand when to comment and when not to. I think there are a number of examples of leaders who kind of jump on and respond to things on their social media account that, that the social media team's already responded to a day earlier and got sorted. And, and I think that it makes total sense for some leaders, depending on the role, to have a team supporting them in managing queries through their channels as well. And I think being transparent in that is fine, that I tweet and I answer some, but I can't answer them all, and that's okay, because you're the CEO, not, the social media team. But so some of that enabling support and practical guidance, don't wade into that. This is our patch. This is your patch. If you've got other personal values that you want to share, go for that. But here's some support. As well, clearance of content. I think we expect CEOs to kind of know everything, but we all know from working in government that people are responsible for their own patches. So, helping get accurate content out and supporting that, or and working with different parts of the business to give them a heads up that, we want to start shining a light on that area, means that, we can just open up clearances and make life a little bit easier there. I think they're my top, but just really practical, how to help them do it a bit better. And look, if they don't have it on their phone, like, set it up. I mean, just down to here's how to do it, if they need that initial support.
Yeah, very practical enablement. Tim, would you add anything in terms of that practical support from leaders' advisors?
Yeah, I mean, the thing you want to do is you want to enable them to be a strong leader in the space. So, but you still want to keep it their voice. I've seen teams where they just basically write. You can tell where a comms person or someone else has just written all their content. So really good content in the leader's voice, and obviously speaking to their values and what and issues and things they want to comment on. I think does really well. And I'll go back again to the, looking at data and analytics and stuff. Often I've seen where leaders will just want things churned out, but there's no actual look, like, who's actually reading this? Is it actually working? Is it getting an impact with the audience? So a bit of analysis of what is going out and being able to adjust the strategy. But those teams that support the leaders, don't want them doing everything. You want it to be a collaboration and them trying to assist the leader to get out what they want, I think.
Wonderful. Mark?
Yeah, I think also there are other sides to leaders apart from the business that they're working in. And I think people will engage with those stories around a leader, So if you look at where I'm working at the moment in Ambulance Victoria, Tony Walker, the CEO, is fascinated by space. And he's always tweeting, some interesting videos and things around space and what have you. And that positions him as a different sort of person. He does have interests outside of saving lives, which is pretty important in itself. But he has interests that will lure other people in via social media platforms as well. So I think it helps if you can find other ways of telling stories about your leaders outside of the traditional storytelling of the organisation.
Yeah, and harping back to something you said earlier, Mark, it's around owning the platform and the channels and the methods of engagement from an organisation. I think that ties in beautifully with it, because a very simple explanation of this, or a very simple example of this, is there is no way that sort of scenario can play out in mainstream press. There is no chance to kind of talk about space as a passion point when you're talking about Ambulances Victoria. So in this case, social media presents that opportunity to provide a more holistic view of the human being, the human behind the leader, as we talk about it, because that's what will drive connection and engagement with audiences. No one wants to hear business speak all the time. They do want to understand more about what drives a person, and therefore,
Roger,
from a talent perspective, what attracts you.
On that one, because I think that was a very good point in the report around sort of an organisation versus a human. And so I think humans want to connect with other humans, right? And I feel like when the digital leaders go into like a social media space, it creates a real connection, whereas it's very easy to be upset or angry or have some opinion about some government organisation or some organisation that there's no face to it. And I feel like when you create that human connection, that's what people respond to. So I just think that's always very important.
This is all about debunking myths, and it's this perception that revealing more about yourself is vulnerability, whereas it's actually a great strength. And I think that's what we're trying to encourage leaders, is being more human actually presents a wonderful opportunity rather than trying to, stand behind a brand or an institution. So spot on there. So look, just in close. Oh, sorry, Amanda.
Well, I guess I was thinking about that in reading the report, and then in preparation for this discussion as well about, I'm pro social media. Let me say that straight up. But I do sometimes think that, it is a big ask for individuals to put themselves out there at times in a public way. And I was sort of thinking, a lot of people kind of join the public service and will choose an organisation that aligns with their values. And so often it isn't hard to post social media messages that are quite proud of where you work and the work that you do. But I guess as you move up the chain, there is increased visibility of you as an individual. And I'm sort of conscious that people, use social media to, for their work, and it might be their personal account, but that they'll use it for work, and then, they'll change jobs into another leadership role, and then they'll take it there. And all of a sudden there's a digital trail of, everything that they've ever said about a topic. And I also think that there's power in that, but it is something that can be quite challenging for leaders to have to manage at times. And I was sort of reflecting on trying to think about some people who I think use social media well. And one example is Julie Inman-Grant, the e-safety commissioner. So, she comes from a tech background, so that's sort of her bread and butter, and now obviously moved into a tech role. And so it makes sense for her to be out on Twitter. But, at Senate estimates recently, she was asked about some of the tweets that she'd made, and the way that she'd spoken about the agency being the first of its kind in the world, and down to really kind of, nitpicking some of the language, which, we all know about the limitations of how much you can say on Twitter. And so I just thought, got someone who's really experienced, who's sort of still being held to account on some really small things on Twitter, and was asked, is it your personal account or your professional one? And so I do think when we support leaders in this work, it's kind of worth acknowledging that context, that it does bring, even though it's empowering, it does bring, I think, some genuine anxiety and some increased scrutiny on them. And, so even for those that are seasoned, it's something that can be a challenge. So, yeah, I guess I wanted to throw that out there too. I don't know what you guys think. I don't know what you think about that, but
I'd suggest that scrutiny would probably already be there if it wasn't for social media anyway.
For sure. But it's just a very, it's just an out there way for people to kind of get that feedback, not from citizens. I think that they're, but from government, and if you are outspoken on certain issues, the way that public sector leaders are, promoted and moved into roles. It's just interesting to watch, I think, in future years, what impact that will have, if any. I don't know. But, yeah, I think it's an interesting time and a big ask of leaders. But
I think, Amanda, that's definitely the landscape we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's good to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
That you're in that world, that everything you say, from 5-10 years ago, people will be able to track it down and see it.
And I think that used to be the case for politicians and not for apolitical public servants, and so it is a bit of a new world for public servants, which, I think is where we need to get to, but it's definitely a time of transition, I think, for many.
I think they're very fair points, and the only thing I'd add along Mark's line is it's not exclusively what's put in the digital environment that is shared and discussed and debated and critiqued in the digital environment. And the one thing that we constantly see is, yes, everyone leaves digital fingerprints and footprints, regardless of who you are, regardless of what level you are. Every single interaction you make should have purpose behind it to avoid, or at least very much limit, that risk going forward. But it's better to be part of that community, better to be part of that conversation in order to shape and influence discussion rather than let others control your reputation. So it's a really key point here, and that's where the knowledge and empowerment and education piece comes in. And hopefully, as you're highlighting here, Amanda, hopefully that extends across all levels and starts to influence policy as well, to give leaders a bit more confidence in what they can and should do online, because there's a huge opportunity out there in terms of the engagement and the influence in a positive way that can be had. It's just about setting the environment around leaders up for success. So look, as we finish up the conversation today then, and you've already touched on it, Amanda, would anyone like to call out a specific example of someone who is working within the public sector, a leader, an emerging leader, whoever it is, who's doing a great job? Because I find it's always really good to give others examples to point them to look at and model their own behaviours from. So anyone, feel free to share an example that comes to mind.
Can I jump in with a couple? Just from my personal experience, and Mark will know this one, but I find Tony Walker's, the CEO of AMS Victoria, his social media I find is very genuine and authentic. Like, I know it's him and his voice. So it's a good one to follow. He's obviously very active on there. And these people I've worked with, so I can kind of judge like the authenticity. Lord Mayor Sally Cap, like, I find her social media, her LinkedIn is very much what she thinks and her voice and her opinion on things. And some just outside of public sector, but I think are good leaders on social. I find Sally McManus's voice is very, it's very much her opinion on things and well constructed. And I find Grace Tame, if you're talking about leaders and leadership, she is not hesitant to call things out and drive change. So I've found her social media in the last 12 months has been a very good example of showing leadership in digital.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Just on Tony's social media, I'll give you an example of why it's really good. So as we record this episode, a Verioc report hasn't been commissioned into Ambulance Victoria. It's coming out next week. But he's already on LinkedIn and Twitter alluded to the fact that the report is coming out, you know, that they're going to accept all the findings from the commission and what have you, and, you know, there's a whole body of work that's obviously going on behind that. But I think as a leader, actually preempting the fact that a report is coming out of that nature is really, really extraordinary. So, you know, that's why he's good on social. The other person I might point to is a few years ago, I was lucky enough to go to NYPD when I was working for Victoria Police and met spent a few days with the head of digital and social there, a woman called Yael Bartua. And she's since left NYPD, but she's very active in the social space and has found a whole market in terms of training for police forces, particularly in the US and what have you. So she's worth a look as well, because I think, you know, if you're looking at a particular market, she's certainly targeted it, found it, and working with it. So there's a couple of good examples there.
Thank you. And Amanda, did you want to close with anyone, or are you happy to leave things where they are?
Yeah, I gave my shout out to Julie, and yeah, which I think is really exciting, and just a good example of how you know, you can sort of really use social media to align with the work that you're delivering. So I think that's really great, and yeah, that's probably it.
Excellent. No, thank you. Thank you all. They're always good to have those practical examples to look at and see and learn how others do it, why they do it, what they get from it. That practical experience is always incredibly helpful. So look, thank you all three of you for your time and insights today. It's incredibly helpful, and I know it will help others start or certainly continue and build momentum around this journey for online participation for leaders. So we'll be sure to include links to your various social profiles should people wish to reach out and tap you on the shoulder for the things you've raised today. So thanks for that, and thanks again for all of you making time to tune in today.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Roger.